Now it seems that if the word Râtrî in Atirâtra is still understood as to mean night, and that if the sacrifice is even now performed during the night, there is no reason why we should not similarly interpret the same word in other forms. The objection that the soma juice is not extracted during the night is more imaginary than real, for as a matter of fact, the soma libations are made in the usual way during the Atirâtra sacrifice. This sacrifice is performed at the beginning and the end of every satra, and all 3 libations of soma are always offered during the 3 turns of the night. The Atirâtra Brahmana, in explaining the origin of this sacrifice, tells us that the Asuras had taken shelter in the night, and the Devas, who had taken shelter during the day, wanted to expel them from the dark regions. But amongst the Devas, Indra alone was found ready and willing to undertake the task, and entering into the darkness, he, with the assistance of Mitras, turned the Asuras out of the first part of the night by the first soma libation, while by means of the middle turn, at the passing of the soma cup, the Asuras were turned out of the middle part, and by the third turn out of the third or the last part of the night. The 3 soma libations, here spoken of, are all made during the night, and the Brahmana further observes that there is no other deity save Indra and the Mitras to whom they are offered. The next section of the Brahmana distinctly raises the question, how are the Pavamanya Sutras to be chanted for the purification of the soma juice provided for the night? Whereas such sutras refer only to the day, but not to the night, and answers it by stating that the stotras are the same for the day and for the night. It is clear from this that the soma juice was extracted and purified at night during the Atirâtra sacrifice, and Indra was the only deity to whom the libations were offered, in order to help him in his fight with the Asuras, who had taken shelter in the darkness of the night. That this is an ancient sacrifice is further proved by the occurrence of a similar ceremony in the Parsi scripture. The word does not occur in the Avestas, but we are told that there are 3 parts of the night, and that the first of these parts, fire, the son of Ahura Mazda, calls upon the master of the house to arise and put on his girdle, and to fetch clean wood in order that he may burn bright. For, says fire, here comes Azi, made by the Daivas, who is about to strike against me and wants to put out my life. As the same request is made during the second and third part of the night. The close resemblance between this and the 3 sections of the Atirâtra sacrifice does not seem to have yet been noticed, but whether noticed or not, it shows that this ancient rite performed during the night for the purpose of helping Indra, or the deity that fought with the powers of darkness, and that such sacrificial acts as putting on the girdle, or the squeezing of the soma, were performed during this period of darkness. Now, what applies to the sacrifice of a single night might well be extended to cases where sacrifices had to be performed for 2, 3, or more continuous nights. I've already seen before that the ancient sacrificers completed their sacrificial sessions in 10 months, and a long night followed the completion of these sacrifices. What did the sacrificers do during this long night? Couldn't have slept all the time, and as a matter of fact, we know that people in the extreme north of Europe and Asia do not, even at present, sleep during the whole of the long night which occurs in their part of the globe. An account published in 1900 in the Land of the Long Night, Paul du Chaillu informs us that, although the sun went below the horizon for several days in the Arctic regions, yet during the period, the Lapps could tell from the stars whether it was day or night, and they were accustomed to gauge time of the stars according to their height above the horizon, just as we do at home with the sun. And what the Lapps do now must have been done by the oldest inhabitants of the circumpolar regions. It is therefore clear the ancient sacrificers of the ancient race could not have gone to sleep after their sacrificing for 10 months. Did they then sit idle with their hands folded while Indra was fighting for them with the powers of darkness? They performed their sacrifices for 10 months with a view to help Indra in his war with Vala. And just at the time when Indra most needed the help of invigorating songs and Soma libations, are we to suppose that these sacrificers sat idle, gave up sacrifices, and left Indra to fight Vala alone, single-handed as best he could? The whole theory of sacrifices negates such suppositions. Therefore, if the Arctic theory is true, and if the ancestor of the Vedic rishis ever lived in a region where the darkness of the night lasted for several days, a day being taken as a measure of some time equal to 24 hours, we naturally expect to find a series of nightly Soma sacrifices performed during the period to help the gods in their struggle with the demons of darkness. As a matter of fact, there are in Vedic sacrificial literature a number of sacrifices which, if we include the Atirâtra in it, extend from 1 to 100 nights. Commenters and even the authors of the Purânas knew little about the ancient Arctic home and have converted these night sacrifices into day sacrifices. But the explanation evidently appears to be invented at a time when the true nature of the Râtrî or Râtrî Sattras was forgotten, and it does not therefore preclude us from interpreting these facts in a different way. As stated above, if we accept the explanation given, we cannot explain why the series of night sacrifices should abruptly end with the Shata-kratu, or the 100-night sacrifice. But by the Arctic theory, we can explain the fact satisfactorily by supposing the duration of the long night in the ancient home varied from 1 night of 24 hours to 100 continuous nights of 2400 hours, according to its latitude, and that the 100 nightly Soma sacrifices corresponded to the different durations of the night as it lasted in different places in the ancient home. Thus, where the darkness lasted only for 10 nights or 240 hours, a Dashhatra sacrifice was performed, while where it lasted for 100 nights, 2400 hours, a Shata-kratu sacrifice was necessary. There are no sacrifices after Shata-kratu because 100 continuous nights mark the maximum duration of darkness experienced by the ancient sacrificers of the race. We have seen the legend of Aditi indicates a period of 7 months sunshine, join it to the dawn and twilight of 30 days each, and we're left with 3 months, or if we take the year to consist of 365 days, then 95 days, for the duration of the long continuous night. A result which remarkably corresponds to the longest duration of the night sacrifices known in Vedic literature. The dawn marked the end of the long night, and could not, therefore, be included in the latter, at least for sacrificial purposes. In fact, separate sacrifices are enjoined for the dawn in sacrificial works, and we may therefore safely exclude the long dawn from the province of the nightly sacrifices. In the same way may be said of the period of the long evening twilight. 100 nights sacrifice thus marked the maximum duration of darkness during which Indra fought with Vala, and was strengthened by the Soma libations offered to him in this sacrifice. As there is no other theory to account for the existence of the night sacrifices, and especially if their number, to wit 100, these sacrifices may safely be taken to indicate the existence of an ancient year, approximately divided into 7 months sunshine, 1 month's dawn, 1 month's evening twilight, and 3 months long continuous night. There are other considerations which point out the same conclusion. In post-Vedic literature, we have a persistent tradition that Indra alone, above all gods, is the master of 100 sacrifices, and that, as this attribute formed, so to say, the very essence of Indraship, he always jealously watched all possible encroachments against it. But European scholars, relying upon the fact that even Sayana prefers except in a few places, to interpret Shata-kratu, as applied to Indra in the Rig Veda, as meaning not the master of 100 sacrifices, but the lord of 100 mights or powers. And they have not only put aside the Puranic tradition, but declined to interpret the word kratu in Rig Veda, except in the sense of power, energy, skill, wisdom, or generally speaking, the power of body or mind. But if the above explanation of the origin of night sacrifices is correct, we must retrace our steps and acknowledge that the Puranic tradition or legend is, after all, not built upon a pure misunderstanding of the original meaning of the epithet as applied to Indra in the Vedic literature. The fact that traditions in post-Vedic literature are often found to have but a slender basis in the Vedas, in the present case we have something more reliable and tangible to go upon. We have a group, an isolated group of 100 nightly Soma sacrifices, and as long as it stands unexplained in the Vedic sacrificial literature, it would be unreasonable to decline to connect it with Puranic tradition of Indra's sole mastership of the 100 sacrifices, especially when, in the light of the Arctic's theory, the two can be so well and intelligibly connected. The 100 sacrifices, which are regarded as constituting the essence of Indraship in the Purânas, are said to be the Ashvamedha sacrifice, and it may, at the outset, be urged that the Shata-kratu sacrifice, mentioned in the sacrificial works, is not an Ashvamedha sacrifice, but the distinction is neither important nor material. The Ashvamedha sacrifice is a Soma sacrifice, and is described in the sacrificial works along with the night sacrifices. When 100 offerings of food to be made in the Ashvamedha sacrifice are mentioned, and states that Prajapati obtaining these sacrifices during the night, and consequently are called Râtrî Sattras. The duration of the Ashvamedha sacrifice is again not fixed, inasmuch as it depends on the return of the horse, and as we can see in the Rig Veda, the sacrificial horse is identified with the sun moving in waters. The return of the sacrificial horse may therefore be taken to symbolize the return of the sun after the long night, and a close resemblance between the Ashvamedha and night sacrifices, which were performed to enable Indra to fight with Vala and rescue the dawn and the sun from his clutches, may thus be taken as established. At any rate, we need not be surprised if the Shata-kratu Soma sacrifice appears in the form of 100 Ashvamedha sacrifices in the Purânas. The tradition is substantially the same in either case, and when it can be so easily and naturally explained on the Arctic theory, it would not be reasonable to set it aside and hold that the writers of the Purânas created it by misinterpreting the word Shata-kratu occurring in the Vedas. We have seen that Shata-kratu, as applied to Indra, is interpreted by Western scholars, and in many places even by Sayana himself, meaning the Lord of 100 powers. Sayana now and then suggests or gives an alternative explanation, and makes Indra the master of 100 sacrifices. But Western scholars have gone further and discarded all other explanations except the one previously noted. It is therefore necessary to examine the meaning of this epithet as used in the Rig Veda a little more closely in this place. If the word kratu in Shata-kratu be interpreted to mean might or power, the number Shata, which strictly denotes 100, will have to be taken as equivalent to many or numerous, inasmuch as no definite set of 100 powers could be pointed out as specially belonging to Indra. That the word Shata may be so interpreted is evident from the fact that the adjectives like Shatanita and Shatamuchi, as applied to Indra in Rig Veda, are found in other places. Again, Indra's arrow is once called Shata-pradna. It's also called Sahasraparna, the same verse. While Soma is represented as going in 100 ways, and in a few hymns, after it is said to be going in 1,000 ways. Even the adjective Shata-manyu, which Sayana interpreted as meaning master of 100 sacrifices, has its counterpart, if not in Rig Veda, at least in the Sama Veda. It shows the Vedic bards considered 100 and 1,000 as interchangeable numerals in some places, and if a numeral Shata in Shata-kratu has the same character, we should naturally have met with a paraphrase of the epithet in Shata-kratu, somewhere applied in Vedic literature. But although this epithet is applied to Indra and occurs about 60 times in Rig Veda and several times in other Vedic works, nowhere do we find it paraphrased, which shows that the Vedic bards did not feel themselves at liberty to alter or paraphrase it if they liked. The adjective applied to Indra does not necessarily mean more than 100. It does not follow that on this account we should give up the ordinary meaning of Shata in Shata-kratu. If the word kratu has nowhere been used in Rig Veda to denote a sacrifice, we may have been justified in interpreting it in the way suggested by Western scholars. But as observed by Dr. Haug, when Vashishta prayed to Indra, "Carry, O Indra, our sacrificial performance through, just as a father does to his sons by assisting them. Teach us, O thou, who art invoked by many, that we may in this turn of night reach alive the sphere of light." The prayer, in all probability, refers to the sacrificial performance held for the purpose of enabling the sacrificers to safely reach the other end of the night. And we find quotes and interpretations in the same way. Sayana, in his commentary on the Atirâtra Brahmana, though not in Rig Veda, Vyasa also takes the same view, and as the Atirâtra sacrifice is referred to expressly by its name in Rig Veda, it should not at all be unlikely that a verse referring to this Soma sacrifice should occur in other hymns. Hence, if there are passages where it can be taken to mean sacrifice, there is no reason why the epithet be not understood to mean the master of 100 sacrifices, as suggested by Puranic tradition. Another fact which favors this interpretation is that in Rig Veda, Indra is described as destroying 90, 99, or 100 fortresses or cities of his enemies. Now, Devapura, which means the fortress of the gods, has been interpreted to mean days in the description of the Dashratra sacrifice in the Râtrî Sattras. And if Devapura means days, the Purâh, cities or fortresses of Shambhara, may well be taken to mean nights. This view is confirmed by the statement in the Atirâtra Brahmana, previously quoted, which says that the Asuras found shelter with the night, or in other words, the darkness of the night was, so to say, their fortress. Indra's destroying 100 forts of Shambhara is therefore equivalent to his fighting with the enemy for 100 continuous nights, a period during which the ancient sacrificers offered him Soma libations in order that he may be better prepared for the struggle with Vala. The destruction of 99 or 100 forts of the enemy, a group of 100 nightly sacrifices, and 9 and 90 rivers, which Indra is described as crossing during his fight with Ai, and 100 leather straps with which Kutsa is said to have bound down Indra into his sacrifice in the Taindaya Brahmana, from which he is invoked to free himself in Rig Veda, are but so many different kaleidoscopic views of the same idea, which makes Indra, and Indra alone, the lord of 100 sacrifices. And if we take all these together, they undoubtedly point out the existence of 100 continuous nights in the ancient home of the ancestors of the Vedic people. 100, moving in the abode of Indra, are said to turn on and turn off the course of the ordinary days, when Indra strikes Vritra with his bolt. and there we have distinct allusion either to 100 sacrifices performed or to 100 continuous nights required for securing a complete victory over the powers of darkness in the nether world, and which nights, or rather one long night of 100 days, may well be described as breaking off and bringing back the succession of ordinary days and nights, inasmuch as the long night immediately follows and precedes a period of sunshine in the Arctic regions. Thanks for liking, commenting, and subscribing to our videos. What do you think of the evidence of the Arctic home in the Vedas? Let us know in the comments down below. Remember to smash that like button.